Well, welcome to the AsOne Leadership Podcast. We're really looking forward to today's discussion. My name is Luke Williams and I'm the lead pastor at Follow Baptist Church. And today's guest is Lindsay Tunbridge from Youth Dimension. Welcome, Lindsay.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you on the show today, mate. And for those that don't know Lindsay, maybe you've been living under a rock, but Lindsay is...
I think we've all been living under a COVID rock, haven't we?
The last couple of years, that's all we've been able to do.
Yeah.
But Lindsay's well known in the youth sort of space, and particularly with Youth Dimension, where he's been involved for many years. And he's currently the executive director of Youth Dimension, and he's also got a doctorate in research psychology. So knows a lot about mental health and is really helpful in that space. So we're going to talk about mental health a bit today.
Yeah, great.
And I think it's an issue that's sort of come to the surface even more in the last couple of years. Lockdowns and isolation, and I think people have been really hit hard in Victoria by COVID and all that. So I think it's a pretty important topic right now to be talking about and helping people with. And I know Youth Dimension is looking to help in schools and with youth right around the country in this area. So, Lindsay, can you tell us a little bit about Youth Dimension? For those that have never heard of it before, what is Youth Dimension? I think affectionately known as YD.
YD.
That's what I've always known it as. And
there's a company called YD as well with a dot at the end, but anyway, we're not related.
A clothing one, but you're the original YD.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what do you tell us about Youth Dimension? Also, what your day-to-day role looks like.
Yeah, sure, for sure. So Youth Dimension's been going for probably 4 decades, a little bit over. And really the heartbeat of that is to give a generation of people hope, particularly young people.
Yep.
That was why it was, inventor's probably the wrong word, but the real passion of its founder, Rob Coyle.
Yep.
So our heartbeat really is to give a generation hope, but in doing that, serving the local church. So the mechanism really that we're most interested in is the local church. So YD thinks of really creative ways to support the local church to give that generation hope.
Yep. So
programs in schools is sort of bread and butter stuff for YD over the years, and it still is. It's morphed a little bit, but to provide a lunchtime program, and you'll probably talk to Owen later about this, but to provide a lunchtime program to a local church so that they can go in and volunteer and run some games and give a talk that really communicates hope is and has been our bread and butter.
Yep.
Over the years.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, isn't it, to get into schools? And I guess those opportunities have dwindled a little bit in recent times in Victoria particularly, but YD's doing a great job still being in schools and allowing churches to get in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to be a support to kids in the local community and also staff and people involved in schools. So,
well, the way we've developed that, we've sort of tweaked it a little bit. So, as you know, the legislation sort of governs what you're allowed to say as a local church in a high school, and fair enough, that's fine.
Yep. So
what we do now is the same mechanism. It's a games day program that you run in a school, but the content of the talk is around wellbeing, and it's best practice secular wellbeing that we're sort of have a lot of expertise in, and we equip the church to be able to give hope, build self-esteem, those sorts of things in that lunchtime program. So, and the schools are loving it.
Yep. Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll get into that a bit today and hear more about that, which should be great. But the other thing that YD's been really well known for is the kind of summer missions. They used to be called coffee shops. Now they're
Drifting
called
Cafe.
Yeah. And I was part of those years ago. And,
were you?
Yeah, so formative. I think we'll talk to Owen a bit about that later on. But I found them really formative and a great stretch of faith and just building team with people as you sort of serve on mission in a local beach town or something like that is.
Well, that was my
cool.
call to Vocational Ministry. So, prior to coming to YD as the sort of the executive director, I was a senior pastor for 22 years in a local church that my wife and I planted.
Yep.
And really the catalyst for that was, falling in love with Jesus and expressing that love through a blue moose down at Port Fairy was the first one.
Yep.
And I remember going down to Port Fairy and sort of sharing the gospel with people. And I wrote Mandy back a little postcard at the time, and it said, "This is what I want to do with the rest of my life." Now, I built aeroplane engines and car engines prior to that. That was my trade. But I said, this is what I want to do. And coming back and finding my way in through Youth Dimension and coming on staff was a great way to move into vocational ministry and then ultimately pastoral ministry.
Yep.
And now back as the executive director. It's bizarre.
Yeah, amazing. Come full circle. And you mentioned Rob Coyle before, who's a bit of a legend in Christian circles.
He is a legend.
And a fun fact for you. Yeah. I actually became a Christian when he was speaking at Mentone Baptist back in the day when I was about 15.
Yeah, great.
He came and he did this thing called an altar call, which they never ever did at Mentone Baptist before.
Oh, right.
And he said if there's anyone that today feels like that they need to respond to the message of Christ, to come forward. And so I did that day and became a Christian and haven't looked back since then.
Yeah,
so
brilliant.
So he's someone I'll always remember. And I just read his book recently that he's, I think it's called Everyday Miracles.
Everyday Miracles, yeah.
Really encouraging. So
that's good.
I think you get a mention there as well from time to time. So
I don't know if it was a good mention or a bad mention.
Yeah, well,
I think it was all right.
You have to read the book to find out, I guess.
But I've read it. It's all right.
Very good. So your day-to-day role, what does it look like at YD?
Well, it's really, executive director, it's overseeing all the different sort of operations of YD. You know, reporting to the board, all those sorts of important things, but not necessarily terribly exciting things. But really what we're doing is, revamping and re-imaging the school's work. So, we mentioned student focus, but we've also got a Gravitate program. We've got about 55 students that we're doing. They're doing a VCE subject, and YD runs that VCE subject for them, ministry and theology that they can do at VCE level. We have an internship program where people come and sort of apprentice with us. So what does mission look like? They spend 12 months with us and do that. So sort of helping. We have directors, of course, and Owen's one of the directors of the outreach. Yep. Running the Blue Moose mission. And the other probably timely thing that we're overseeing, my wife is the head of the Wellbeing department at Youth Dimension. Yep. And as far as growth goes, that's probably got the biggest potential to serve churches, schools, secular contexts all over the place, some of the things that we're developing there. Yep. The wellbeing field in schools, secular or otherwise, is pretty full. The swimming pool's full. Yep. Unfortunately, most of the stuff that is in place really lacks academic baselines, theoretical baselines that make sense. Yep. So there's a lot of talk about mindfulness and other things, which are good, but it's not understood what sort of theoretical perspective around wellbeing does this relate to. Not many people, very few, if any, have any idea. Yep. So YD's sort of niche there is to say, hey, we want to build a wellbeing program for a school that is drawn a straight line from wellbeing theory, best practice, international theory. So that's what we're building. So as far as the day-to-day goes, I'm doing a little bit of heavy lifting in that area for YD, so with everything else.
And I think schools often feel overwhelmed, don't they, with that sort of stuff? Like there's so many issues. I was a chaplain a few years ago at a local government school, and what I couldn't believe, like when I was younger, like you'd see a few kids that were struggling and they might have some problems at home or be on the poverty line or those sorts of things. But they were few and far between. Yeah. Whereas these days it felt like I was meeting with so many kids in the school.
Yeah, fully. Yeah.
All had significant issues with family breakdown or violence, and I just couldn't believe the percentage of kids. So I guess that leads to a question I'd written down for today, and that is, wellbeing is a huge issue in our society these days, and we seem to be very aware of it. But do you think the mental health issues have increased in recent times, or do you think we've just become more aware?
That's a huge question. That's massive. I do a lot of work in India and Nepal with people affected by leprosy. That was part of the PhD. So in countries like that, mental health concerns are heavily stigmatised. So it's like leprosy. So you catch or affected by leprosy in India or Nepal, it's like, there's so much stigma associated with that. Is God punishing you? That's the perception. God's punishing you. And even as family members, if God's punishing you, I'm not really going to get involved with that. So, as a child even, you need to get out and put out onto the street and all sorts of horrific things with the stigma. Mental health is like that. So if you get your little spot for leprosy, I'm not going to show anybody that because I know what that means in my culture, so I'm hiding that. And mental health has been and is in some contexts around the world like that. It's heavily stigmatised. Yep. So why would I report it? I wouldn't. I'd want to hide that. And there's not a lot of places to report it to in many different countries around the world. Yep. So you sort of, travel now to Australia. It's been normalised and that's right. It's normalised. There's a lot of resources for people, and that's great.
Yep.
So if we tap Australia and say, okay, what's happening with the mental health concerns here? Well, we're getting a lot of mental health concerns compared to somewhere like India. And you have some people in the wellbeing field coming back and saying, oh, I was in India, everyone's really happy and but look what they've got. It's so much poorer off than what we've got. There's something wrong with us, and yet what have they got? And they'll focus on that when that's not the reality at all.
It's a facade they put on to hide the mental health stuff.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's a possible explanation. So the idea that another country much worse off than Australia, say, is doing so much better in the area of mental health might be is that it's not being reported anywhere near to the level that it is here, and it's good that it's being reported here.
Yep.
So it's very hard to say, okay, well, if we compare it around different cultures, are the West less resilient than other cultures? Because look at the level of mental health concerns that we have here. So that's probably likely. In fact, large studies which don't make the press, they're not very exciting. Prevalence of mental health concerns largely are the same all around the world. So there's not more in the West necessarily. When you take all those factors into consideration, they're not. Is it increasing though? Let's just look at, say, Australian context, and with COVID, what's the impact of that? Well, I think conclusions are still being drawn. It seems that family violence is up. Now, again, I'm a research psychologist that works in the area of wellbeing and theoretical perspectives. How do we measure wellbeing validly and those sorts of things? So a lot of the clinical context around psychology, that's not my area of expertise at all. But we hear news reports and it makes intuitive sense that, if we're in a domestic violence situation and we're pushed together, then, well, that's not going to go good.
No.
Like, that's bad.
Yep.
As far as outcomes go and all sorts of things. So one of the things we've been doing at YD is we're quite good at measuring mental health constructs, including wellbeing and the real things that contribute to it. So we've been doing that in schools, high schools.
Okay.
So what we know, the other hat that I wear is I work with the Australian Centre on Quality of Life.
Yep.
We've been measuring wellbeing right across the country for sort of decades now. So we've got lots of baselines and so on. So we know that in any population, say a school or even right across the country, 4.4% of that population will have levels of wellbeing that correlate very strongly, low levels of wellbeing that correlate very strongly with, say, depressive symptomology, 4.4%.
Yep.
So we go into a school, hey, we want to measure the wellbeing and of the cohort there. We would expect, on average, 4.4% of this population will be in more trouble than the early settlers as far as, low wellbeing, high levels perhaps that correlate with mental health concerns.
Yep.
During COVID, with numbers of schools, we saw, say, in the VCE cohort, that 4.4% rise to up to nearly 12%.
Yeah. Yep.
So we would say, okay, there's a correlate. Is this COVID the cause? We don't know. But, that's an interesting, is it a coincidence? I think down the road we will see the sort of the true impact of COVID. But,
yep.
That's something we've noticed at YD, looking at wellbeing in schools.
Yeah,
So,
I've just noticed it as a pastor and talking to people in the community, and I sort of think before COVID, so just go back to like 2019 or so, you've always got a percentage of people within your culture that are struggling and really struggling, like depression or high anxiety or stress or emotional turmoil. And, I'm not a researcher like you are, but I'd say like 10 to 20% of the population is sort of in that space. And then the rest of the people, they've got some concerns and stuff, but generally fairly well. It feels like it's almost been turned to the exact opposite, whereas 8 out of 10 people you talk to now are really struggling in some way, whether it's, fear about the future, worry about the virus, they've lost jobs, they've lost a loved one, whatever it may be. It just feels like underneath the surface, the majority of people right now, just under the surface, not miles under the surface, but just under the surface, there's this underlying anxiety and fear. And
look, and I think you're right. So we know what contributes to wellbeing and what protects wellbeing. So the theoretical issues around wellbeing would probably support that and provide some evidence for that as a good conclusion. So we know that the things that protect our wellbeing are things like self-esteem, so how worthwhile we feel as a person.
Yep.
So if you, in a domestic context like we were talking about before, levels, that's under threat a lot more significantly. So when we're in close quarters. So self-esteem, how worthwhile we feel as a person, levels of optimism is a protective device. So our well-being is protected by our self-esteem, how worthwhile we feel.
Yep.
And I mean, this brings us back to, the intersection. So, I mean, of gospel, what's the impact of the gospel on well-being? If you think about the impact of gospel on how worthwhile we feel, like something about Jesus dying on a cross.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
Yep.
So optimism is another one, hope, so when we think about hope, and perceived control. How much control do I feel I have? So we know to say in that cohort that during COVID that went, say, to 12%, levels of perceived control dropped, which you think lockdown, are we coming out? Are we going in? Are we coming out? What the heck is going on? I don't know.
Yep. How long is this going to last for?
It's like, so we're out of control. So the three really important things that protect our levels of well-being, they've been given a gangster slap, honestly, through COVID.
Yep.
Like, they've really been put under the pump. So are people feeling less well because of COVID? Well, there's certainly reasons to think that they would be if those constructs are being hurt in any way. So
for sure. I think this is where the importance of the gospel is so significant, isn't it? Because some of those things that, you've described them one way, but I would talk about your sense of identity, who you are, your sense of security, feeling safe, all those sorts of things. Like if you've built your life on those things, really, in the last couple of years, those things have all crumbled. Yeah. And so this is where the gospel is important, I think, because when you come back to Christ, knowing that you're always valued, doesn't matter how you perform or don't perform, whether you're employed or not.
Absolutely.
You're valued and you're loved and you're chosen and all that sort of stuff. But also there's a security that, like things, we're not guaranteed life will be easy as Christians, but we are guaranteed that we have a hope beyond this life where...
And hope's the key. That's the key. You think of the New Testament.
Yep.
I mean, the majority of the New Testament is written to give hope. Look at 1 Peter in the context of persecution and so on.
Yep.
So what's the hope? If not in this life, then the next.
Yep.
Your calling, your election, these sorts of really important things that are communicated give us hope. And in a secular context, so I mean the other area of research that I've got is in theology. So theological stuff tells us these really important things about the gospel. In the secular context of psychology and research, it tells me that, what the really important things are? That we're valued with ourselves, self-esteem, that we have hope, and that we have a sense of control in the world.
Yep.
It's like...
phenomenal.
Okay. Secular are sitting there going, gee, I wonder why that is. And we're going, well, we know. That's how we're hardwired.
Yep.
A relationship immersed in Trinity gives us a sense of community. I mean, one of the other important things for well-being that we know are personal relationships. Well,
which once again have been taken away, haven't they?
Given a slapping during COVID.
Yep.
So the really interesting thing, Luke, is that for Christians, so you would think, okay, well-being or happiness, Christians ought to have like the trump card on that. We should have higher levels. We don't. No different in the level.
Yep.
Why is that? The reason for that is because the wellbeing construct is exactly like core body temperature. Again, we've been hardwired to be at a certain level, like core body temperature.
Yep.
Hardwired to sit, going too high is bad, too low is terrible. And we adapt and we do all sorts of different things, physiologically and behaviourally to keep our core body temperature, like that. And that's how it sort of has to be, goes well. But well-being is exactly the same. So these are what, people swimming in a well-being pool, they don't have access to these sort of theoretical perspectives for what they're doing in schools around well-being. So we know that it's set. So we expect that we go into a population, the majority of the population is set at a mildly positive level like core body temperature, and it, from 0 to 100, it sits at about 75%, where I just couldn't be any more well at 100 and I got nothing at 0. We know from decades of research that we're hardwired genetically to be set at around 75% of a scale maximum.
Yep.
So that doesn't mean that it can't be dragged out of that little narrow range. It's got to operate within a narrow range like core body temperature, and it's protected by self-esteem, optimism, perceived control, just to name a few.
Yep.
So if they're in good shape, we measure a population and, everything's great. 4.4% will be down here, and we can build those back up, but the rest are are sitting in here. So the gospel doesn't give us, on average, 90% of a core body temperature, but what it does do is build resilience. So it builds the things around the mechanism that protect it. Yeah. Self-esteem. Jesus died for us. You're a worthwhile person. If you're the only person on planet Earth, he would have died for you. You would have probably killed him. So it's like perceived control. We've got a sovereign God. Yep. Read the last page of the book. We're on the winning team. And hope, even if not this life, for the next. So all these important things, it's a mind blow when you live in a theological world, an academic theological world, and you learn these things, and then this secular world, and you learn these things, and why aren't they talking?
Yeah, absolutely.
So YD, the Wellbeing team, is we want to get these two worlds talking.
Yeah, I love that.
We're really passionate about, at Youth Dimension in this area. So.
Yep. I really love that. And I think when people say Christianity is irrelevant, I think we're not communicating it well enough, because it's actually absolutely relevant in all those areas. Yeah. In fact, you're not going to find the health that you really desire in all of its fullness unless you have the gospel intersecting with it, and that's where the resilience and the hope comes from. Yeah. So I really love that, and I think to find yourself in that space is really important. And so when I think about a school context, these days a lot of schools are much better equipped than they used to be. A lot of them have got counsellors, chaplains, psychologists, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And so YD comes into that, and I could imagine some schools going, well, hang on, we've got all this sorted. We've got our wellbeing team. Who are you, and what can you offer? Yeah, exactly. So what is it uniquely that YD can bring into that space to support that existing structure? Yeah. So we're working with the school at the moment. I'm working with the school psychologist. Yep. So around the thing. So one of probably the most, not the most important, but certainly the most important place to start is, where are we at? So we do these wellbeing programs, but where are we at? So one of the things that YD does that just about nobody else does is actually measure the baseline for the school, the whole population, every year level, staff, groundskeeper Willie, whatever, we measure the baseline. And we measure constructs that we know over a couple of decades actually contribute to wellbeing. We don't measure a whole bunch of other stuff that's irrelevant, that contributes nothing to wellbeing. They sound like they ought to, but they don't. So that's probably one of the most strategic things that we offer a school. We come in and we measure the wellbeing of the school. And some of those things that we measure, a whole lot of constructs, but self-esteem, perceived control, optimism. So in a school recently, low levels of self-esteem, and they had all the resources, and they do, and they're terrific. But it gives them a target. Say, okay, if we were going to improve the wellbeing of folks in school, where do we push our resources? Yeah, how do we target those things? So the school psychologist in this case, self-esteem, great. I've got a lot of resources and mechanisms that I can push in. But until that was revealed, it's like, well, there's all sorts of other things that I could offer the school. Many of them aren't needed. So probably that's one of the really big ticket items. The other thing that we've noticed in schools is we go and we measure and we say, okay, you're doing great on this, connectedness to community, personal relationships. Hey, the student body, the cohort's massive, like above the normative range, for expected results. But on these other ones, you're low. So the other thing that we find then is the schools turn to us. Even schools, one school that I've worked with, we had wellbeing officers at every sort of, senior school, middle school. We've got people, dedicated staff, overall wellbeing people that still come and measure after the measurement and say, well, what do we do? Now initially, early on, we would just say, well, we're the numbers guy. It's like, we give you a valid... Now you know. It's the problems. And you're employed to, respond. But what do we do? Because the theoretical stuff that actually contributes to wellbeing is not on the horizon. It's not on the radar of most people that are working in the field. It's not data-driven. It's not evidence-based. So when we say, okay, this makes and contributes to wellbeing and there's a problem here, what do we do? So what we're really working hard to do now is provide schools, secular schools, any school, with a response around those constructs. And we've got some mind blows as far as how we could contribute. It's probably can't say too much. It's being developed,
now. One of the things is our student focus program for a school. Now, it's not the mainstream, but it certainly can support a school program around lifting wellbeing or self-esteem. Because our talk component.
So just explain what student focus looks like for those.
Good. I'm talking code. Gobbledygook. Right. Well, that's what we were saying before, and you'll talk to Proudy about it later. It's the lunchtime games program that we would run, say, for year 7s to 9s.
Okay.
All right. We're building one for primary school, but it'll look a bit different, called Reboot. But at the moment, SFT20, like the cricket. So we go in there and volunteers come in, usually a local church, but it doesn't have to be. But they'll come in and they'll run a lunchtime program. Again, we've been doing this for 4 decades, and you think, it's voluntary for the kids to come in. Why would we come in like it's a hoot? It's seriously fun.
High energy, lots of fun.
Mate, it's redonkulous.
Games, lollies,
honestly.
Noise,
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I remember going to a school 3 decades ago going, I'd like to run a student focus program. Told them what it was, Games Day, and we get a whole lot of kids and we share a little bit of a 3-minute talk, Oh, right, okay. And they gave me this room thinking that we might get like 7 or 8 kids. We had 150 kids. They were out on the oval trying to look like it's serious fun.
Yep.
And the context of that, no matter what the size of the crowd, during lunchtime, we'll give a talk. And the talks that we're giving now are wellbeing talks. So we have 2 streams of talk, secular context, best practice. Here's a talk on self-esteem.
Yep.
The kids are going to learn what it means to feel worthwhile and how you can improve feeling more worthwhile.
Yep.
They'll do that. If it's a Christian school, we've got a bolt on to that whereby you can share the gospel, and that's where we start going like that. What does the cross mean to your sense of being worthwhile as a person? Well, heaps.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
That
You're
gets
valuable enough for him to lay
Yeah.
his life down for you, all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. So that will support something. It's a lunchtime program. It's not a school-wide, but what we're building at the moment, and I'm hoping that, probably over the next 12 months it could go nationally, is something that targets the whole school in areas of wellbeing that's evidence-based, that's driven by data and evidence and research, that the kids just won't be able to put it down. It'll go in the curriculum and the kids will not be able to put it down. It'll be the best sort of 30 minutes of the day for them.
Yeah.
So this is what we're hoping and we're building, but fingers crossed that. So we want to serve schools like that, be able to do that.
I think that's really exciting to be a Christian organisation, but coming in and providing research-based stuff that the schools can't get enough of. So I think it's always important. Sometimes we go, I've got this I can offer to the school, and I'm going to go and tell them, I'm going to do this for you. And they go, well, we don't really need that.
That's right.
You're not going to get schools that say we don't really need that when it comes to welfare.
That's right.
And particularly research stuff and stuff with an evidence base.
Yeah.
They're going to go, we can't get enough of that.
Well,
and so
even what you guys are doing in the school with a food program.
Yep.
It's brilliant. That's a real heart to serve a local community.
Yep.
Like, what for? Well, because we want to serve the local community. Where'd you learn that? Jesus. It's like,
Good place to start.
why are you doing that? Well, that's been modelled. We were taught to serve, and we want to serve, by Jesus. So
and the relationship that comes from that is really significant. And we've found that it flows not just from, when we go into the school, but then when we see the kids out in the community and when we build relationship with staff and all that sort of stuff. So, if you're not in those places, you never have those opportunities to actually build relationships. So I think that's really powerful.
I agree. Not to... I think being in the community is essential, in pastoral work, as we know.
Yep.
You can't be a fly-in pastor and heading up ministries from remote locations and flying in on a Sunday or something like that. Because it's like you said, it's seen Fred down the shop, waiting for the butcher, to cut his steak or something. And, you having a barbie, Fred? Yeah, me too. Oh, yeah. It's all of that, isn't it?
It's incarnational, isn't it? You're
it
actually
is.
with the people. And,
agree.
I think that's really important. So really good. I love what you're saying in terms of you bring all that research base and you help them identify. And I think you can break down year levels. So year 8, they're strong in this and they're not.
Do.
Year 12, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then I think what you're working on now is, okay, so here's the issues we've identified and this is what we can offer to help grow that area so that the percentage increases, people are generally healthier.
That's right.
I think that's really, really exciting. One thing I've heard over the last few years, Lindsay, is when people talk about young people, particularly when older people talk about younger people, when I was young.
Well, mate, grey hair and I'm ED at youth dimension.
Yeah.
What?
And Owen, Owen's
Proud he's a fossil.
He's 70 now or something. I don't know. No, he's not that old.
At least. I hope you've got wheelchair access.
Yeah,
Like,
we'll get him in here. Yeah, but he's come full circle. He's been a lead pastor now. He's come back to work with Youth Dimension because there's that real passion for youth, and I think I've heard a lot of people say, kids these days are just so much less resilient than they used to be, than previous generations. And, we talked a bit more before about stigma, and I think there's been huge growth in the last couple of decades in Australia.
Absolutely.
Because even when I was younger, a bloke would never say, we're struggling, we're tough and we can...
Bulletproof.
Yeah, come out of the war periods and blokes don't cry and all that sort of stuff.
I had to walk uphill both ways to school.
Absolutely.
Through the snow.
No downhill.
With no legs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bleeding. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's horse and cart.
How tough we were in our day.
Yeah, we were really tough, yeah. So that was the badge of honour. I'm tough. I don't need anyone else. We've seen great change in that in the last few decades, which is good. And so maybe that's why we're hearing more about young people. But the accusation still is that young people are much less resilient than they used to be. Do you think that's fair, or do you think it's just a real generalisation?
Well, I'd probably answer it like this. Do young people today have a lower core body temperature than young people of a different era?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No.
Yep.
It's like, so we're hardwired, human beings of every generation are hardwired to have a certain level, say, of wellbeing we were talking about before.
Yep.
So if you're talking about resilience, okay, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about how hard is it to drag people out of that little narrow range of hardwired DNA levels of wellbeing. How hard is it to drag them out? Well, what protects it? Self-esteem, optimism, perceived control, a few other things.
Yep.
And then how quickly can we bounce back? So the question that we're asking, if we want to drill down into it a little bit, is it easy to drag people out of their set point? So we call that wellbeing a set point.
Yep.
It's set, it's hardwired in their DNA. Is it easier to drag them out of that these days? And are they taking longer, to bounce back? That's really hard. How do we answer that question? The research designed to, study that and imagine that would be enormously difficult. So if we think about it intuitively, self-esteem levels of hope, levels of being, having some control in our world, are they lower nowadays for everybody, or young people in our case? And if they're under the pump more, then there is going to be pressure on the system at greater levels than perhaps previously. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to be dragged out of their set point range any quicker, but if the protective stuff around that is really under the pump, then it's possible that, we'll get pulled out of that wonderfully functional operating range, and it might take longer to come back. I don't know those data. Yeah. If young people nowadays have lower levels of self-esteem, or if that's under the pump, more so. You could probably, like if you said, Lynn's go and do a lit review on that for us, we probably could. We could come back with something. But I really think that there's a lot of misconception. I mean, I know as a senior pastor, and you do too, that people would, and it comes from everywhere, but, people would go overseas and they'd come back and share. Inevitably, and it used to drive me, mate, batty, inevitably something like this would come out of well-meaning people. We don't know how good we've got it here. Yeah. Yep. And other things, like they seem so happy over there, and they've got nothing. They're struggling with all the things that we take for granted, and it's like, well, I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you all a gangster slap because we've got it so easy and we're so weak, or we have so many troubles, and these sorts of things. Yep. But as a senior pastor, you hear that, and you think, you don't know what is going on in the lives and families that you're talking to here.
Yep.
It's like, what are you talking about? The depressive symptomologies, the stuff that's going on. And
breakdown, all those sorts of things.
Mate, it's like, what, we're not suffering?
Yeah.
And a large study out of New South Wales found this, that prevalence rates of things like depression, these sorts of things, around the world are very similar. So they're not any more in a Western context than they are somewhere else.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So there's something about being human that humans can get hurt, And it can come from all sorts of different things. Now, I may not be hurt by the fact that I've got no TV, and then over there they've got no TV and they're doing that. May not hurt me, but other stuff will.
Yeah.
It's what's putting the hurt on how worthwhile you feel as a person, your hope for the future, and those, perceived control. That's where it's probably a better place to look. And is there more pressure? So Facebook, I know there's been studies, and again, don't quote me on all of these, it's been a long time. But I remember reading one study, say on social media, on Facebook in particular. Not such a good thing for girls. I don't know why. Well, the study proposed certain things, these were the findings, and it seemed to be actually pretty good for guys. Now, this is going back a long time, the terminology and things they might want to, modernise, I don't know, but back then, the comparison things was raised in this particular study that put pressure on girls and their sense of their identity and these sorts of things, the comparison type things, and look at this particular person, their life looks wonderful, and these sorts of things. For guys, again, it's probably changed, but for back then, it was not a bad thing for guys, because that guys would connect more and sometimes talk a little more about some things perhaps that were real to them, whereas they wouldn't face to face.
Yep.
So, is social media putting pressure on people's sense of being worthwhile as people? It might be. And as technology increases, is that pressure increasing? If it is, it's likely that it would be putting more pressure on young people's self-esteem, which is a protective device around well-being and mental health concerns.
Yep.
So that's how I would think about it. So it's a short question, sorry, and a long answer. But to answer those questions, it would be needing to see some of those impacts on self-esteem and so on.
Yep.
COVID, you'd think, on the sense of control, it'd be putting the hurt on us for that and other things. But.
Yeah, I think one thing that is for sure is that young people these days hear a lot more voices, I think.
Yeah.
When I think about when I was young again, and my parents were a pretty dominant voice in my life. Like they were very influential. So if there was this much influence in my life, my parents probably played about this much role.
Yeah.
And there was much less voices going on around me.
Yeah.
Whereas these days with advertising and social media, and everyone's got an opinion.
Yeah.
And our kids now are swimming in all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, even particularly parents and people of authority, teachers, whatever, it feels like their influence is less because some of their voice is drowned out by the myriad of different opinions and worldviews they're hearing in their room, on their phones, everywhere they go.
It's 24/7, isn't it?
Yeah. So what do you reckon around social media? Do you think it's wise to put some sort of restrictions around that for kids, for all of us, like to, I guess, limit the amount of social media or balance it out with other healthier ways of interaction?
Look, there'd be better people to ask than me around those things. But we know things that contribute to our well-being are things with like social connections, connecting with other people.
Yeah.
Does social media help that or hinder that? Well, there's probably a case for both. Mm-hmm. We know when we've been stuck doing Zoom, it's like, we're sort of connecting, but it's not the same. It's like being in a room.
Yeah.
It's not the same. But it's something, it's not everything to be able to connect socially. Yeah. So would you want the something that's better than nothing when you've got the opportunity to have the real deal, like connecting with people, through that? So I think that's part of the picture for me, and how I would think about answering something like, those sorts of things. I guess social media with all the safety boundaries, all of those sorts of things, and those things factored in. If there's no other way to connect, then it's some sort of connection, and they certainly found that with guys in that particular study that I've got no idea. I had to dig it out, but they found that with guys. But why would you connect on a screen when you can connect in person? It's so much better.
Yep,
so you'd want to maximise that. Connectedness to community. If your community is not being connected with because you're, on a screen, say, you're going to lose that. Connectedness to community is another something that's really good for our well-being. If screen stuff is giving self-esteem a bashing, why would you want to, you'd want to limit that?
Yep.
And all these sorts of things. This is, I guess, how I would think about it. But again, there'd be a lot, a clinical perspective would give, a different perspective perhaps. But
Yeah, I think just from a personal perspective, I think there's real positives of social media that I've found, and keeping in touch with people that live miles away, and
great.
particularly in isolation, for grandparents who can't see their grandkids growing up, they've been able to FaceTime or see photos, and that's really good. But I think most of us realise when it's starting to become unhealthy.
Yeah.
So there's been times for me personally, even in recent times, where I've just switched off for a few weeks, just because the stuff I'm seeing, and it seems to be a much more divisive place, social media, than what it started out to be, and a lot of passive-aggressive kind of behaviour. And for me, when I find myself immersed in that, I find myself, it starts to impact my mental health. So sometimes I just got to go, you know what, for the next few weeks, I'm just going to switch off, quieten the noise, and, get back to some of those other practices like a bit of silence and solitude, or in the word, prayer, those sorts of things. So I think, just learning to understand your own mental health and pick up those little indicators when things aren't as good as they could be, and then making the adjustments, even for a short period of time, can be really helpful.
It is very interesting to see how difficult it is for some people, and I've experienced this, to say, you know what, bang it on aeroplane mode, disconnect. And I think for younger people too, there's that sense of, I need to be wired in to other people. If they need something at 2:00 in the morning, I need to be able to take the call or interact or provide some help or some care and these sorts of things. To say, you know what, that, being on all the time, 24/7, takes a toll. I mean, we know that.
Yep.
That's why we sort of go on a holiday.
Yep.
It's because we've been on at work and we want to get off. But some social media and technology doesn't allow you to switch it off.
Yeah.
And I think practice of mindfulness is brilliant, because it essentially does that.
Mm.
It's okay. Well, I want to relax. I want to focus on my breathing, say, and I'll notice a thought that comes through, and it might be a thought of, Samantha texted me, I've got to call it, whatever it is, or you're a scum-sucking pig, whatever the thought is, that floats through. Yeah. Mindfulness teaches you to sort of say, you know what, you could engage with that. You notice it, there it is, I got it, but let it go.
Yeah.
And just, practice that discipline. So the mindfulness essentially, on a different context, say with social media, I'm noticing all of these things coming in, but I'm not letting any of them go.
Mm.
Dial off, let it go.
Yeah.
It really makes sense what you're saying, that, getting into that space, connecting with Trinity, in that peacefulness and a space that refreshes our self-esteem, reminds us that we're loved, and, these sorts of things are good.
I think if you ask most people, are you addicted to anything, most people would say, oh, no. And I think the answer most of the time is boom, boom, wrong answer. Yeah. We're addicts in denial when it comes to our phones and technology. Yeah. And I found recently trying to get back to sort of silence and solitude, where there's no agenda, I'm not taking a book, I'm not even taking the Bible with me, I'm just there to focus in on creation and God's goodness and all of that. And when I first started doing that, I'd take my phone with me. And it'd be like 2 minutes. I'd be like, just check that email.
Check it out.
I'd get the message or beep, 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 and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't take the phone with me anymore.
Yeah.
It's just like, I heard someone say once, they were talking about Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath as a practice in their life. Yeah. And they said it was my way of practicing the sovereignty of God.
Beautiful.
In other words, when I switch off, He's still in control. He's not going to freak out if I have a day off.
I don't think he needs your phone to connect with you either.
I don't think so. That's right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes just leave your phone at home, get away, spend some time, and I think that can be really healthy. So,
well, my favourite show, Luke, is Alone. It's extreme. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No.
Yeah, so they dropped contestants, say 10 contestants, into the wilderness of Alaska, and they've got to survive. They've got no food. They've got to make all their own food, shelter. They're allowed to take 10 things in, so they take a saw and a tarp and whatever. Boom, and it's the last one standing. The thing that takes most of them out is the solitude.
Yeah. Yep. It's surprising.
It's a wrestle. They love the idea of. I mean, the other issue is that I've noticed on a show like this is that when they're put into a place of nothing, then they're left with their own thoughts, and sometimes that hurts them. Yeah, like big time. The other stuff, the phone drowns it out. It quietens this, and it's I go to a place of solitude. I mean, that can be a pretty dangerous spot sometimes because you're left with your own thoughts and reflecting on the past and looking at the future, and there's nothing to distract me, and it's like, well, how do I get away from these thoughts? Well, I need to get back to the phone and the email, and so that's what I've noticed from this tally show.
Yep.
it's like it messes with them.
Yeah.
So,
I've noticed it in my own life. Like, I think solitude takes practice because we just don't do it. We're not good at it.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by noise. And when you stop all that noise and just be with yourself, it can be difficult. So you might go and try it and you get 2 minutes the first time.
Yeah.
And the next time it might be 2.5 minutes and it might work up to 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
I've got this practice recently where I set an alarm in my phone 3 times a day. And when it goes off on the screen, it just says stop.
Brilliant.
And so I just stop, pray, bring things back to Jesus.
Yeah.
Because you can just go through your day and not think about that at all.
Yeah.
And you get overwhelmed with stuff. So I'm finding that really helpful is just a practice. And as soon as it goes off, it might just be 2 minutes. I might get up and go for a walk around the block and pray. And I think that's been a really good thing for me.
Great.
It's been a fascinating chat, Lindsay, and it's great to hear the work you're doing with Youth Dimension and particularly in this area of mental health, which is such a big issue for all of us. So just to finish up, what are some simple things you think people can do each and every day, and they can just be little things that can really help people with their own mental health?
Yeah, well, I think we've nailed a couple of them already. So reconnecting with God, like big time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, I mean, people get hung up on this. It's like, in my area growing up, it was all about the quiet time.
Mm.
If you're not spending 4 hours a day in the Word, well,
God's
what the heck are you doing? For goodness sake.
Yeah.
So, my thing is, and you nailed it, reconnecting with God, with Trinity is essential through the Word, through nature. People do it in all sorts of different music, whatever it is. So grounding yourself in that makes sense to me.
And finding what works for you.
And
what works for you will be different for me.
Exactly. So don't make it a thing that's ultimately going to hurt you. It's like I've got to discipline myself to 5 times a day for every day of the week or something. I think if you want to get started in reconnecting like that, then you do something small and achievable. And as you achieve that, it gives you a little bit of mojo for growing it a little bit.
Yep.
But you don't go, I want to build great big muscles on my chest, or I want to bench press and put 450 kilos on and just lift that sucker. You got to build up.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. So you set yourself in the area of reconnecting with God with some achievable goals that you go out. Why do I want them to? Because it gives me mojo for a little bit more. It's like, okay, I did that, and you get the results of that, and you think, okay, that builds your motivation for either continuing. And look, a long walk in the same direction is hard. A little bit often should be the goal.
Yep.
Like regular.
Yep. Rhythms.
So set something that's achievable both in its magnitude and its duration. I can sustain this, doesn't matter if it's eating habits or whatever. So same principle.
Yep.
I mean, everyone knows that. So I think that's good. That's as a past what I used to encourage people to do.
Yeah.
Just bite off something you can chew for a bit and,
Yep.
do you good. So that's good. Fundamental stuff like a little bit of exercise, eating healthy stuff, those sorts of things are sort of fundamental to good health and mental health as well.
Yep.
There's no guarantee against mental health concerns, but we just know, the Mediterranean diet. I'm not giving health advice here, but we just know. I read Women's Weekly. I don't even know if they make it. I've never read it in my life, but you know what I mean? Mediterranean
Except in the doctor's surgery, right?
Yeah, in the doctor's surgery waiting because I'm, eating bad. I should have been eating the Mediterranean. So eating some good stuff, exercise is good. But then, and again, for everybody in their own context, what's some stuff that I can do that supports my sense of being a worthwhile person. Supports my building hope in my life. What sort of perspectives? What can I do, around that? And it'll be different for everybody. In the sense of control. How can I negotiate my world that maintains just enough control? So it might just be, reconnecting with God obviously ticks those 3 boxes. I'm reconnecting with someone who's sovereign.
Yep.
So I'm reminding that first one we said ticks so many boxes about the other things. But I think you can still be intentional, additive to that, intentional in those other areas. Is there a place I go or a person or a group or an activity that I come back just feeling a little more optimistic, about life?
Yep.
Well, that's a place you'd want to make sure you're at.
Yeah, I was just saying to our intern last week that same thing. And if you're a young person listening, I think listen to yourself in the things that you do. And I wish I had learnt this like 20 or 30 years ago, and I'm just learning it in the last few years, but identifying the things that actually refresh me and recharge my batteries.
That's right.
And they'll be different for you,
Yeah.
but I've got to work out what they are for me. So
Yeah.
I've recently discovered that I love long walks. So my day off yesterday, I went for a 15K walk.
Whoa.
Now, for some people, they're like,
Mate.
that is the last thing on earth I want to do.
Heck, are you thinking?
But for me, I love it because
Yeah.
I'm out there, I'm getting exercise,
Yeah.
I'm seeing nature, I'm spending time with God, maybe listen to a podcast, whatever. I've worked out that I like sketching. Now, I never saw myself as an artistic person,
Yeah,
but I actually really enjoy it because everything else just tunes out and I'm just focusing on the detail. And, I love reading a book. So sitting in the egg chair on my back deck and reading a book, they're the sort of things that I do that I've found, even if I just do it for 10 minutes, I feel so much more refreshed. And so if you're a young person, if you can identify those things now, I think it will really set you up for the rest of your life.
Look, I was talking to a young person the other day under some clinical care.
Yep.
So let me pass this on, which, bolsters that. Do something nice for yourself, do something nice for other people, and do something where you get a sense that you're achieving something in life.
Yep.
That is one of we call them the golden triangle of happiness in the secular context, is achieving in life, a sense that you're achieving in life. So what this clinical psychologist is giving this young person is exactly that. She didn't know that she was doing that because it was fundamental to our well-being, theoretically, but it is.
Yep.
So you do something nice for yourself because you're a worthwhile person. So it's reminding you that you are a worthwhile person and you can enjoy sitting in a chair, doing some, whatever it is, for you, doing something nice for other people connects you. Personal relationships are so important for our mental health and our well-being.
Absolutely.
So you're doing something nice for another. I always used to say, if you want to take it next level, do something nice for somebody else. Don't let them know that you did it.
Nobody knows,
Nobody knows. I mean, that's a good one.
Yep.
But anyway, and then do something, and this is once a day. Do something nice for yourself once a day, something nice for somebody else. It might be a quick phone call, write a letter, whatever. And then do something where you sense you're achieving. So this is where exercise is good. Not only does it give us endorphins, increased capillary density, all those sorts of things. But it says we're setting some goals and, man, I've achieved those goals.
Yep.
Like, to be consistent in exercise, I used to race competitively cycling, 30 kilos ago.
Yep.
And, you had to do 500, 600K, 700K a week of training, all the time. It's really hard. So you do something that gives you that sense of I'm achieving something. So exercise, apart from the physical benefits, helps you with feeling like you're achieving something.
Yeah. Well, I saw that yesterday. I did my 15Ks in the morning and I thought, oh, good. Now the rest of the day I can read a book, I can whatever, but I feel like I've got out, I've achieved something.
That's
and I think that's really great advice.
Those things we've laid out, connecting with God, do something nice for yourself, others, and you do something in a sense of achieving. Think creatively in your own world about things targeted towards me feeling more worthwhile, being more optimistic, and building a sense of control. And it's achieving does, sense of control in the world.
Yep.
Mate, they all sound pretty easy, intuitive, like, was that on a Fantails wrapper? Mate, they are fully profound.
Yep.
Like, seriously profound. You could write a library to evidence around those things for their benefits and why they're good for us as people.
And sometimes it is those simple things. They're simple for a reason. Do the simple things well and you find yourself in a much better mental space. So.
Right, yeah.
Well, Lindsay, it's been great chatting, mate. So Youth Dimension, where do we find out more about that?
Just Google it.
Google it.
Google's your best friend, isn't it?
Find Youth Dimension on the website.
Yeah, so go there and you'll see some tabs with the SFT20, which is the student-focused school stuff, the Wellbeing, and lots of new things coming along all the time. So,
Awesome.
Yeah, just go on there.
Well, good on you, mate. It's really inspiring to hear the things you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Thank you,
and look forward to chatting again one time.
You too. I've heard all about you guys too, and it's wonderful.
Good on you, Lindsay.
Brilliant.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. And thank you for tuning into the AsOne Leadership Podcast. We hope you found today's topic really helpful. And if you're watching on YouTube, please leave a like and a review and let us know what you found helpful about today. And also, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast, it's really helpful if you give us a 5-star review, leave a comment and tell everyone about it. It helps us to get the word out, and hopefully this content will be helpful for others as well.